"You should have moved out already," my sister said, handing a stranger a house key in our driveway. I stared at the man holding a clipboard. "Escrow closes today," he said. I blinked. "My name is Olivia Bennett, and I'm 37 years old. I work as a hospital receptionist. My life is stable but simple. 2 years ago, I moved back into my childhood home to help care for my mother during her illness. After Mom passed away, I stayed in the house to maintain it and handle bills. My younger sister, Danielle, had always been the favorite in the extended family because she was loud, confident, and persuasive. Relatives often assumed Danielle handled everything important. In reality, I handled practical responsibilities like insurance, repairs, and paperwork. Danielle rarely visited, but constantly spoke about selling the house eventually. I avoided conflict because I wanted the family to stay peaceful after our loss. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. If you've ever been overlooked during family property decisions, this story is for you. Quiet siblings are often ignored while louder relatives take control. Subscribe if you've ever been pushed aside in family matters. Comment if relatives ever tried to claim something unfairly. Click hype if you know what it's like. I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon and found a real estate agent and a well-dressed buyer inspecting the property. They were walking through the backyard, measuring windows, discussing paint colors. Danielle was with them, smiling like she owned the place. She announced she had already sold the house and the closing would happen that week. My stomach dropped. I never agreed to sell our home. "You're just living here," Danielle said, waving her hand dismissively. "I handle the real decisions." She claimed the house legally belonged to her and said I should start packing. The buyer looked uncomfortable, but clearly assumed Danielle had authority. I began questioning the paperwork, but Danielle cut me off. "Don't embarrass yourself," she said. The agent shuffled some documents awkwardly. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was a title company representative verifying ownership details. The woman sounded confused. She said 2 legal owners appeared on the property record. One signature was missing. Mine. Danielle had secretly listed the house months earlier without informing me. She told the real estate agent I was simply a temporary occupant. That stung worse than I expected. The smell of Mom's lavender sachets still lingered in the hallway closet, and Danielle was erasing me like I'd never belonged here. At a family gathering the following weekend, Danielle publicly claimed I was refusing to move out because I wanted free housing. Relatives began believing her story. Aunt Carol pulled me aside and suggested I be reasonable. Uncle Thomas said I should be grateful Danielle was handling the sale. Nobody asked for my side. Danielle cornered me in the kitchen and pressured me to sign a document approving the sale immediately. "You're ruining this for everyone," she hissed. She warned that refusing would ruin the deal and embarrass the family. Her perfume was overpowering, making the small kitchen feel suffocating. I didn't argue. Instead, I began researching the property records quietly. Every night after work, I reviewed documents at the kitchen table. The house creaked around me, familiar sounds that steadied my nerves. I gathered information about the title carefully, methodically. I wasn't going to fight Danielle with words. I remembered helping Mom organize legal paperwork years earlier. She had been meticulous about details, especially after Dad died. Mom insisted both daughters be listed on important property documents. "You never know what might happen," she'd told me. I'd help her file those papers myself. What they didn't know was I had copies of the original property documents. I discovered official records proving the house was jointly owned by both sisters. I also found emails between Danielle and the real estate agent that misrepresented the ownership. In one message, Danielle explicitly told the agent to ignore my sister's concerns. Another email mentioned scheduling the closing before Olivia realizes what's happening. The clock ticked loudly in the dining room as I printed everything. I had a plan they never saw coming. A retired legal clerk who volunteers at the hospital became my unexpected ally. His name was Mr. Chen, and he'd worked in property law for 30 years before retiring. I confided in him during my lunch break one day. He listened without interrupting, then explained how property titles and sales contracts work. Request a formal title verification before the sale closes, he advised. Let the system do the work for you. Meanwhile, Danielle grew increasingly arrogant. She told relatives the sale was already finalized and boasted about her negotiation skills. She began discussing how she'd spend the money from the house sale. New car, vacation, maybe a condo downtown. I stayed quiet and let the title process continue. Mr. Chen suggested confronting Danielle only when the title company confirmed the legal facts. Don't tip your hand early, he said. The tension built toward the closing meeting scheduled by the real estate company. Danielle texted me the address. Be there or be left out, she wrote. The real estate closing office smelled like new carpet and coffee. Danielle arrived confidently, dressed like she was about to close $1 million deal. The buyer sat across from us, friendly but businesslike. The title officer, a woman named Miss Rodriguez, reviewed documents carefully. I waited. Danielle signed papers cheerfully, chatting about her plans. Then Miss Rodriguez paused. Miss Bennett, she said, looking at me, can you explain the ownership record? I asked her to clarify what she meant. She confirmed the property legally belonged to both sisters jointly. The sale could not proceed without my signature. Danielle's smile froze. She tried to argue that I'd already agreed to the sale verbally. We discussed this, she insisted. I calmly presented printed copies of property records and Danielle's misleading emails. I slid them across the table. You tried to sell something that wasn't yours alone, I said quietly. Miss Rodriguez read the emails, her expression hardening. She stated the transaction must be halted until both owners agree. The buyer stood up, apologizing but clearly frustrated. He withdrew from the deal, realizing the situation had been misrepresented. Danielle's confidence collapsed. The real estate agent looked at her with barely concealed anger. The house sale was officially canceled due to incomplete ownership approval. Danielle lost credibility with relatives who had believed her version of events. Word spread quickly about what she'd tried to do. Olivia became actively involved in managing the property legally. I decided to keep the home for now, while carefully considering future options. Family members began acknowledging my role in maintaining the house all along. Aunt Carol apologized for assuming I was being difficult. Danielle was forced to communicate respectfully rather than control decisions. We eventually had a real conversation about the house, both of us sitting at the kitchen table where Mom used to pay bills. They always believed the loudest voice in the room. That day, the paperwork spoke louder. If you've experienced relatives trying to sell or control family property unfairly, you're not alone. Share your stories in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you believe quiet people deserve a voice in family decisions. Your support helps stories like this reach people who need to hear them. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Thank you for watching. If my story touched you, a like would mean the world. To help others find this story, click hype. I always read the comments, so feel free to share a piece of your story with us.